racist pilot attacked Snoop Dogg in first class, but what happened next shocked everyone. Snoop Dogg boarded his private flight with a sense of relief, expecting nothing but peace, luxury, and a much-needed escape from the spotlight. The jet's sleek interior, adorned with plush leather seats and ambient lighting, made the aircraft feel more like a five-star hotel than a mere mode of transportation. Everything about the atmosphere screamed indulgence, from the soft hum of the engines to the calming scent of lavender that wafted through the air. Snoop leaned back, letting the world fade away as he scrolled through his meticulously curated playlist, the beats of classic hip-hop washing over him like a wave of nostalgia. A smiling flight attendant appeared, offering him a glass of freshly pressed juice on a silver tray. Snoop took a slow sip, savoring the crisp, refreshing taste, and allowed himself to unwind, melting into the comfort of his seat. It was the perfect setup for the vacation he had been dreaming of. No cameras, no interviews, no schedules, just pure, uninterrupted tranquility. As the plane ascended into the sky, disappearing into a blanket of clouds, Snoop glanced out of the window at the vast expanse of blue. For a moment, he felt completely at peace, free from the chaos that usually surrounded him. But then, almost imperceptibly at first, a strange, unsettling feeling began to creep into his consciousness. He brushed it off as residual stress from his hectic lifestyle, but the unease clung to him like a shadow. The flight had been smooth for the first hour or so, with no turbulence or interruptions. Snoop had settled into relaxation mode, his mind drifting as the gentle rhythm of the aircraft lulled him into a serene state. But then, the cockpit door opened, and out stepped the captain, a tall man in his 40s with a strong jawline and a neatly pressed uniform. His authoritative presence filled the cabin as he made his way down the aisle, casually engaging with the other passengers. His authoritative presence filled the aisle with sweat. Snoop barely noticed the captain at first, too absorbed in his music to pay much attention. But as the captain approached his seat, something shifted. The captain's smile, once warm and professional, faded as his eyes locked onto Snoop's. His gaze turned icy, and the once casual interaction suddenly felt tense. "Enjoying the flight, sir?" the captain asked, his voice carrying a strange edge that hadn't been there moments before. Snoop removed his headphones, slightly taken aback by the change in tone. "Yeah, man, everything's cool," he replied, nodding, though his eyes narrowed with suspicion. There was something off about this guy, something unsettling. The captain stood there for a beat too long, his eyes never leaving Snoop's, and the atmosphere in the cabin thickened with a palpable tension. What should have been a routine conversation had suddenly turned into something far more ominous. The captain's demeanor wasn't just cold, it was calculating. As though he was sizing Snoop up for reasons unknown. Snoop shifted in his seat, his instincts kicking in. He had been in enough unpredictable situations in his life to recognize when something was about to go sideways. And this felt like one of those moments. But what could be happening on a private jet, high above the clouds, with nowhere to go, and no one to call for help? As the captain lingered, Snoop's heart rate quickened, but he kept his composure. He'd been in the game too long to let anyone see him sweat. "Everything good?" Snoop asked, trying to sound casual, though his voice carried a hint of wariness. The captain's lips curled into a strange half-smile. "For now," he said cryptically, before turning on his heel and walking back toward the cockpit, leaving Snoop in a swirl of confusion and growing unease. What did he mean by that? For now. Snoop's mind raced, but before he could dwell on it, the flight attendant returned with another tray, this time offering what appeared to be a selection of expensive wines. She smiled, but there was something forced about it, like she knew something she wasn't saying. "Is everything okay?" Snoop asked, his eyes narrowing at her, trying to gauge her reaction. Her smile faltered for a split second before she quickly recovered. "Of course, Mr. Dogg. If you need anything, Please, don't hesitate to ask." Her words were polite, but her eyes betrayed her. There was fear there, just beneath the surface. Now fully alert, Snoop felt the weight of the situation pressing in on him. What had started as a dream vacation was rapidly turning into something else. Something far more dangerous. He glanced around the cabin, scanning for any signs of trouble. Everything looked normal on the surface, but the energy had shifted. The other passengers, oblivious to the tension, continued chatting or dozing in their seats. But Snoop knew better. His instincts screamed at him to stay sharp, to prepare for whatever was coming. The eerie feeling in the air was more than just a hunch. It was the calm before the storm. And whatever was about to happen, Snoop had the distinct sense that he was at the center of it. Without warning, the captain's tone shifted, turning from professional to accusatory. "May I ask who you are and why you're on this flight?" His voice dripped with an unmistakable edge, as if he were questioning Snoop's very presence on his own chartered plane. Snoop Dogg, usually cool under pressure, blinked in disbelief, his signature charisma momentarily fading. "I'm Snoop Dogg," he said, his voice steady but tinged with confusion. "Booked this flight fair and square." He could sense the growing hostility in the air, a tension that had nothing to do with routine security or protocol. This felt different, personal. The captain's expression darkened, his eyes narrowing as he leaned in slightly. "You don't exactly look like you belong here." The words cut through the cabin like a knife, leaving the other passengers in stunned silence. Snoop, who had faced his fair share of prejudice over the years, felt a familiar yet bitter sting. He had dealt with hostility in many forms, disguised as jokes, hidden behind smiles. But this was something darker. The captain's words weren't about flight safety or protocol. They were laced with something far more insidious. Snoop straightened up in his seat, his posture now more defensive than relaxed. "Look, everything's legit. You can check the paperwork. It's all in order," he replied, keeping his voice even, though a storm of emotions brewed inside him. He wasn't about to let this man intimidate him, but the situation was escalating fast and he knew it. The captain, however, wasn't interested in facts. His sneer deepened and his eyes flickered with disdain. "People like you don't belong on flights like this," he muttered, low enough for only Snoop to hear, but with enough venom that it sent a chill down Snoop's spine. The accusation was clear, and it was ugly. The captain wasn't talking about Snoop's celebrity status or his booking history. He was talking about something far more primal. Race, class, status. The weight of those words, spoken in such a confined space, felt suffocating. Snoop's heart pounded, not in fear, but in anger and disbelief. Before Snoop could respond, the intercom crackled to life, breaking the tense silence that had settled over the cabin. "Mr. Broadus, please remain seated. I'll be with you shortly." The voice was calm, authoritative, and unmistakably directed at him. But the formality of using his legal name had more sweetness than the sense of isolation he felt. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. Every passenger's gaze was now firmly fixed on Snoop, their eyes wide with curiosity, fear, or silent judgment. What had begun as a luxurious getaway had spiraled into something far more unsettling. Snoop could feel the weight of their stares pressing down on him, and the cabin, once spacious and inviting, now felt claustrophobic. Snoop's mind raced. Who was coming for him? What was this all about? He had chartered this flight legitimately. Everything was by the book. But now, it seemed like none of that mattered. The captain's disdain, the ominous announcement, the eerie silence. It all pointed to something sinister. He could feel the walls closing in, the quiet before the storm. His instincts told him to stay calm, to wait and see what was about to unfold. But the danger was real, and it was closing in fast. Moments later, the captain stormed down the aisle, his face rigid with fury, his eyes blazing with unchecked hostility. Behind him, 2 flight attendants followed, their faces pale, clearly caught in the crossfire of whatever was about to unfold. The tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife, and every passenger's gaze was fixed on the unfolding confrontation. "Get up!" the captain barked, his voice booming through the cabin like a thunderclap. "You're a danger to this flight." Snoop remained seated, his body tense, but his resolve unshaken. He wasn't about to let this man push him around, not after everything he had endured in his life. Injustice wasn't new to him, but that didn't mean he would tolerate it. He kept his composure, his voice steady but defiant. "I ain't going anywhere. I paid for this flight just like everyone else." The words hung in the air, challenging the captain's authority, and for a brief moment, the cabin held its breath. Snoop's calm defiance was a stark contrast to the captain's growing rage, and everyone on board could feel the escalating danger. But the captain, now determined to make an example of Snoop, was far from backing down. His face twisted with anger as he loomed over Snoop. Without warning, he reached out, and with a brutal shove sent Snoop sprawling into the aisle. Gasps rippled through the cabin as the passengers looked on in shock and disbelief. Snoop, stunned by the sudden violence, lay sprawled on the floor, his body aching from the impact. But more than the physical pain was the sting of humiliation. He had been shoved, manhandled, like he was less than human, all for daring to stand his ground. The injustice of it all burned in his chest, but he remained silent, refusing to give the captain the satisfaction of seeing him falter. "Get off this plane before I call the authorities," the captain snarled, his voice dripping with venom. He reached down, grabbed Snoop's belongings, his designer bag, his jacket, his personal items, and carelessly tossed them down the aisle, their contents spilling out as they hit the floor. The other passengers were frozen, caught between fear and disbelief, unsure of what to do or say. The plane, which had been on course for a peaceful journey, suddenly began its descent. The captain had ordered an emergency landing, and it became clear this wasn't going to be at a standard airport. Through the small windows, the passengers could see nothing but dense, untouched wilderness below. The jet had diverted to a remote airstrip, miles from civilization, isolated from any chance of outside help. As the plane touched down with a jolt, Snoop slowly pulled himself to his feet, his pride bruised, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. He adjusted his jacket and shot the captain a cold, piercing stare. The plane taxied to a halt on a crude strip of asphalt surrounded by thick jungle. The air inside was tense, filled with the silent terror of the passengers who hadn't signed up for this kind of drama. Snoop stood at the door of the plane as it opened with a mechanical whine. A wave of humid, oppressive jungle air hit him in the face, a stark contrast to the air-conditioned luxury of the cabin. He looked out at the desolate airstrip, nothing but trees and thick undergrowth as far as the eye could see. The realization hit him hard. He was being abandoned here, far from anyone who might care. The captain, standing at the entrance to the cockpit, sneered at him one final time. "You don't belong here," he spat, the words dripping with contempt and finality. Snoop, his eyes burning with indignation, stepped off the plane and onto the tarmac. He watched as the door slammed shut behind him, sealing off any hope of resolution. The engines roared to life, and in moments, the jet lifted off the ground, disappearing into the sky, leaving him standing alone in the middle of nowhere. The sound of the plane faded into the distance, replaced by the eerie quiet of the jungle. Snoop stood there, surrounded by wilderness, his mind racing. The injustice of the situation boiled inside him, but there was something else, too. Determination. He wasn't going to let this break him. Stranded, humiliated, and left to fend for himself, Snoop took a deep breath, the weight of the captain's words still echoing in his ears. "You don't belong here," But he knew better. He belonged anywhere he wanted to be. He glanced around at the thick trees and unfamiliar terrain, his survival instincts kicking in. One thing was clear: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. For hours, Snoop wandered through the dense jungle, his body bruised and his energy drained. Every step felt heavier than the last, and the thick foliage seemed to close in around him as the humid air clung to his skin. The once vibrant music mogul was now humbled by the harsh reality of survival. His designer shoes were caked in mud, and his clothes were torn by the relentless branches and undergrowth. But Snoop kept moving, fueled by an indomitable spirit that refused to be broken. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting eerie shadows across the jungle, darkness began to envelop him. Fatigue weighed on his limbs, and doubt crept into his mind. Was anyone even looking for him? But just as despair began to settle in, Snoop noticed a faint, flickering light in the distance. A beacon of hope amid the wilderness. He staggered toward it, each step filled with cautious optimism. The light grew brighter, and soon he found himself on the outskirts of a small village hidden deep in the jungle. The village was modest, small huts made of bamboo and thatch, illuminated by the soft glow of firelight. As he approached, the villagers, initially wary, watched the disheveled figure cautiously. For a moment, silence hung in the air as the villagers studied him, unsure of who or what had wandered into their isolated community. But then, from the back of the crowd, a voice broke the tension. "Yo, is that Snoop Dogg?" The disbelief in the speaker's tone was unmistakable. Whispers spread like wildfire through the crowd, and soon the atmosphere shifted from suspicion to excitement. The recognition dawned, and in an instant the villagers rushed forward, their arms open with kindness and curiosity. They had seen him in music videos, on TV, in movies, but never had they imagined meeting him here, of all places. The villagers welcomed Snoop with open arms, offering him food, water, and shelter. They nursed his wounds, bandaging his cuts, and providing warmth for his weary soul. Around a fire, Snoop shared his story, his voice a mix of exhaustion and relief. He told them about the injustice he had faced, the captain's cruelty, and how he had been left stranded with no one to turn to. The villagers listened intently, their expressions shifting from empathy to outrage. They vowed to help him however they could, and soon, with their assistance, Snoop's journey back home was set in motion. A local villager, with connections to the nearest airstrip, arranged for a flight to take him back to safety. Snoop, now rejuvenated by the kindness of strangers, boarded the small plane that would take him back to civilization. As the aircraft lifted off the jungle airstrip, Snoop gazed out the window, filled with gratitude for the people who had restored his faith in humanity. But he also knew deep down that this was far from over. He was going home to fight. Back in the US. Snoop wasted no time. Fueled by the anger and injustice of what had happened, he took his story public, live streaming the entire ordeal to his millions of fans. In the video, he spoke candidly about the racial profiling and discrimination he had faced, how he had been treated like a second-class citizen despite paying for the flight just like anyone else. His raw honesty struck a chord, and the story went viral. Almost overnight, the hashtag #JusticeForSnoop began trending on every social media platform. Celebrities, fans, and activists rallied behind him, calling for accountability and change. Millions of people flooded the internet with support, sharing their own stories of injustice and discrimination. The movement grew rapidly, with marches, interviews, and public demands for action. Snoop's fight became bigger than just one man's experience. It became a symbol of resistance against the systemic racism and classism that still plagued the world. Under immense public pressure, the airline was forced to conduct an internal investigation, and the captain was brought to court. His defense crumbled under the weight of evidence and testimony, and he was found guilty of misconduct and racial discrimination. The court stripped him of his pilot's license, ensuring he would never fly again. Snoop had not only survived the ordeal, he had turned it into a powerful statement of justice. He became a vocal advocate for change, pushing for reforms in the aviation industry and beyond. The victory was sweet, not just because he had won the legal battle, but because he had sparked a movement that would resonate far beyond his personal experience. Finally, after the dust had settled and justice had been served, Snoop boarded another flight, this time to the Maldives, where his original vacation had been planned. As the tropical island paradise came into view, Snoop smiled to himself, the warm ocean breeze washing over him as the plane touched down. He had fought against humiliation and won, but more than that, he had become a beacon of hope and resilience for millions of others who had faced similar struggles. As he stepped off the plane and onto the sun-soaked sands of the Maldives, Snoop knew one thing for sure. This victory was about more than just him. It was about justice, unity, and the power of standing up when others try to knock you down. Subscribe for more interesting stories.